So Brian, based on these last 3 episodes, man, my appetite is wet and I am hungry. We've talked about how negotiation in its past has not been serving companies with the tips and tricks and 52 ways to do this and do that and become a better negotiator. And you've laid out a clear plan for like, hey, we need to create a plan for how to do this, because otherwise we're just ending up with the same results we've had before. You've talked about the 2 things that buyers are generally like 97% like of buyers are going to do these 2 things, which is commoditize your product and ask for more value or discount your product. And then we laid out the 3 questions all the sellers need to ask, right? Which reveals the pain that the ideal buyer is going through, the gains, the dream outcome they can have, and offering 3 different pathways or customized offers for them to be able to get what they want and get away from what they're trying to get away from. But now I'm like, okay, this is amazing. I'm like taking furious notes here, and I'm like, well, yeah, but how do we get this done practically?
Yeah,
we're from discovery call through the end, because in order to build a plan to end and close strong here, we need to be able to start well. So how do you start well, and then how do you manage the steps through all the way through the close?
Yeah. So the 3 questions you talked about is what we refer to as the blueprint, the negotiation blueprint, right? What happens to both sides if we don't agree? What is a great deal like if we do? And 3 paths forward. Before we train or coach anyone, we don't want to be zero basing the answers to those questions on every deal. We could, by the way, we could take 10 minutes and do it. We're still going to be better off than not doing it at all. But the answers to those questions follow patterns. When I'm selling this solution against this competitive type, maybe even in this vertical, these answers to these questions follow patterns. We want to answer those questions up front before the deal team we're coaching or the sales team that we're training. And when they're looking, they're like, all right, here's the deal I'm working on. They can go to the outline of the answers to those questions and customize that for them. Again, they all follow patterns. There's no reason to recreate, what happens to both sides if we don't agree, et cetera. And then go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah. So is this the work you're doing before the discovery call? This is pre-discovery call work you're doing and coming up with the questions for them.
Well, this is the work that the consultant, me, should be doing before we train or coach a person. Now let's get into so we've given the rep answers to these 3 questions, and they already know where the conversation is going to go. So when they're out doing their traditional sales discovery, whatever it is they're using, Medic, whatever it is they're using to do discovery, they need to add in these signaling questions, right? I've already thought through the buyers and the criteria when they're making their decision against, we know who the competitor is. I'm just going to bake these into my decision. Hey, in addition to this, Dan, when and it's funny too, when we don't say, how am I better than my competitor? It's when you're making a decision between any vendor, any supplier in this space, are you considering these stakeholders in your organization? Are these the criteria that the different stakeholders are using or you're using? How would you rack and stack those criteria? This is very easy. We don't want this to be separate of the sales process. We want to embed this in your early discovery calls. It's back to, we all know we should be planning for negotiation earlier. We just don't know how to do it. This is what we do. We think through their alternative. We bake that into our sales process discovery questions, and we start that signaling. We start changing the conversation very early on.
So you said it's the signal questions are you considering, and it's stakeholders, the stakeholders criteria, and what was that third one?
Oh, and then how do you sort of rank stack those?
Them?
Yeah, when you're making a decision.
Yes, we asked those 3 questions in order to set up the bigger question of what happens if both sides don't agree. Or are you trying to tease out the information so that you can get these bigger answers to the bigger questions?
We ask the question ourselves first. What is the customer's most likely alternative to us? And then we think through, so if they're making an optimal decision, who's going to be involved? What are the criteria that should be there? And actually, again, once that's done, we can use that over and over again on subsequent similar deals. We then simply take that and turn it into customer-facing questions about, okay, Dan, I've thought through this. When you're making a decision on suppliers in this space, let's talk a little bit. And in fact, the script that we often use is, we've watched a lot of people in your position make this decision, and we've collected some good data on stakeholders that should be involved and what an optimal decision looks like. Can I share some of that with you? Are you considering these 4 different stakeholders and the needs of those stakeholders? In fact, let me give you an example of the stakeholders and some of the needs that we've seen other people in your chair make these kinds of decisions. And again, just getting that in front of them, we're attacking same thing. This is very simple what we're doing. We're trying to change the conversation from same thing to get stakeholders and variables into their brain early on. And by the way, people share data more early on in the sales cycle. And so when it's early on in the sales process and you're out there executing your normal discovery, you slip these in. As you get closer to the negotiation, people start holding cards closer to their chest. So this is a really optimal time when people's brains are ripe to start dropping some of those decision criteria in there. We can do the same with commercial terms. When you finalize your agreements, we know the price is going to be important, but how do you feel about limits of liability and liquidated damages clauses and volume agreements and term agreements, like which are general, how do you rack and stack those? So we're changing that conversation from same thing and price to multiple variables when you compare us and multiple variables on the commercial terms when it's safe early on. And we're baking it in with our regular discovery. And this stuff follows patterns. It's quite simple to do. Like I said, once you've done it once or twice, you've got the questions baked.
So you try to get all these questions up front so you can get the data ahead of time. And you've given multiple questions you want answers to on the discovery call. Are there any questions you hold back for getting later? Or do you try to get everything on the front end?
I would say in order of priority, the most important piece is their decision and their alternative, right? So early on, we want to start signaling on that. Who should be involved? What criteria are there? And putting that in the context of let me help you on your decision process. I've seen other people do this. As we get closer to the deal, that's typically where we want to start asking the more commercial terms discussions to say, okay, Dan, I know we're about 6 months out. I want to start preparing for this. And we already know price is going to be an issue, but let me talk to you about, there's a lot of things we need to reach agreement on in your organization. How are these kind of force ranked? Because I want to get ready for you. And this is where we start teasing out those 2 or 3 terms where we know the discussion is going to be really tight and there's going to be heat. But we're doing that before we're at the table. So by the time we get to the table, hopefully we will never eliminate, I can get the same thing cheaper, but we've had huge impact on lessening the probability that that's going to happen. Right. So we've already laid the groundwork for that. It's sort of like the airplanes before the ground troops come in. And then the ground troops are in the end when we're getting ready to present our 3 different offers to them. We've already signaled and changed the conversation a little bit.
What are some questions you ask to get more of like what happens if the deal doesn't go through? Do you just ask them straight up, what happens if this deal doesn't go through?
It's more about their alternative. So their alternative could be build it themselves. It could be do nothing, right? And it could be my named competitor. So in the software company where their biggest competitor was go dark, their customers are not going to do anything. In fact, they said, I'm not using half the software you sold me last time. Why would I re-up with this new agreement? And they panicked. And we did the analytics of what going dark looked like. And if we're selling this kind of solution and now we have these new features coming out, if they go dark, they're going to miss out on these things. So the questions to you is, hey, Dan, when you think about going dark, have you thought about the impacts of X, Y, and Z? Right? Because it's kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt to a degree. When you're making that decision between signing with us and doing nothing. So the questions are different based on what the alternative is, right? That part is different. But again, those follow patterns. Once you've done that, the next time you come up against a customer that's going dark, you start early on asking those questions about the pain of going dark, because they may believe it. They may believe that, and it doesn't matter whether they believe going dark is painless or they're lying to us. It doesn't matter. The prescription's the same. I just want to let you know that I know by asking you these questions. And it makes it not adversarial to keep it in terms of decision dialogue. When you make that decision, have you considered the impact on your customers? Have you considered the impact on your tech staff and operations when these kinds of things happen or don't happen? Yeah.
Yep. And I imagine it's pretty reliable. Most discovery calls have some kind of questions baked into it to reveal pain and paint a dream outcome or a solution.
Yep. Yeah, and we're getting down to a more granular level. I'm glad you bring up discovery because early stage discovery is a lot of open ended questions. Hey Dan, what's keeping you awake at night? What's on your plate? And so what you're giving me is what you already know, right? And so it's helpful to me, and we should do those. When we get late stage, we think of this as guided discovery. These are very specific questions that, again, I don't really even care if I get an answer to because I'm just trying to get you thinking about these things. But we've got to get down to the level of stakeholder and granular criteria. We did all the open-ended stuff early on and have you tell me what you already know. Now it's my opportunity to begin leading you in a way that's helpful, by the way, right? That's the whole idea. Is none of this is adversarial. And I actually do feel good about this. This is consulting. If you're helping a customer make a better decision, then you're actually doing good work for them. So, and most people, I would say, do react that way. They're still going to lie to you a little bit about what's important and what isn't, but I don't really care. I've gotten some of this in front of you, and it sets the ground later when I come back to hit on those key things.
So get the data up front, some of it in the middle, like the nitty gritty of the contract, but it's really all to set up the 3 paths forward.
Correct.
In a language that's unique to them, their stakeholders, their criteria, and the way they have them ranked. And that's why you can more easily win way more clients at the end, because hardly anybody's doing this amount of work, especially towards the end of the deal. And if they start at the end of the deal, then they're too late because it became a thing you had to do up front in order to get the data, in order to make the 3 paths forward that are unique and customized to them. It makes them feel heard. Am I saying that back right?
Yeah. And no, I would add a little structure. So the customer is usually asking for something. Like, this is the order that I want. And that order is typically suboptimal for us. It's not the best kind of solution we want to be selling. And by the way, it's not going to move metrics in the organization the way we would desire to. But one of the 3 options is always sort of the crummy one they've asked us for. And we present that one. And then we present what we call the optimal, which we think is optimal for them and optimal for us. Yeah. And then there's kind of a middle one. And again, they're all titled in the way it's going to have impact on your organization. And what we find is that what they're asking for looks terrible compared to the other 2 now, right? If we've done our job right. And do they choose the optimal? No. More often than not, what we see is what we co-create in the 4th one is something in the middle that's a jump up from what we were buying and selling. And we've moved them up and expanded our footprint and given them a better solution. And that's what happens more often than not. Every now and then, if we're lucky, we get the optimal one, but not usually.
So if you're listening to this, I hope you're seeing some clear dots connected here about how and why all the other sales negotiation tips and tricks aren't working. When you start to lay out a clear plan for how to actually connect it from the beginning all the way through the end and what it takes to close deals reliably, like all the other negotiation ways of doing negotiation just looks like shooting a shotgun and hoping that it hits the right target here. But if you're able to train your sales staff reliably to be able to execute this plan, even a rough version of it, they're going to be so much better equipped in order to close more deals. So Brian, thank you so much for walking me through these. I'm hoping we can revisit these and unpack them even more in the future.
Great. Thank you.